Okay, so good morning and welcome again in our virtual class. So another topic for this week. So chapter 9, the process of the interaction design. Okay, so imagine that you have been asked to design a cloud-based service to enable people to share and curate their photos, movies, music, chats, documents, and so on in an efficient, safe, and enjoyable way. So what would you do? How would you start? What you would you begin by sketching how the interface might look, um, how the system architecture should be structured, or just start coding? Or would you start by asking user about their current experiences with sharing files and examine the existing tools, for example, Dropbox and Google Drive, and based on this, begin thinking about how you were going to design and the new service. So what would you do next? Okay, so design is a practical and creative activity. So with the aim of developing a product that helps its user to achieve their goals. In previous lesson, we looked at different kinds of interactive product issues that need to be taken into account when doing interaction design. Some of the theoretical basis for the field and techniques for gathering and analyzing data to understand user goal. So in this lesson, we start to explore how we can design and build interactive products. um, Interaction design as being concerned with the designing interactive product to support the way people communicate and interact in their everyday and working lives. Um, but how do you go about doing this? Okay, so developing a product must begin with gaining some understanding of what is required of it. But where do these requirements come from? So these are the question. Um, Whom do you ask about them? Underlying good interaction design is the philosophy of user-centered design. Example, involving users throughout the development. But who are the user? Will they know what they want or need, even if we can find them to ask? For an innovative product, users are unlikely to be able to envision what is possible. So where do these ideas come from? So in this lesson, we raise the answer of these kinds of questions. So the overview. So what's involved in interaction product? So importance of involving user, degrees of user involvement, what is a user-centered approach, and the four basic activities. Oh, okay, so some practical uses. Who are the user? Who are the needs? Where do alternatives come from? How to choose among alternatives and how to integrate interaction design in activities in other life cycles model. So what is involved in interaction design? Sabi nga, it's a process, a goal-directed problem solving activity formed by the intended use target domain, material, cost, feasibility, a creativity activity, a decision-making activity to balance trade-off. Uh, Interaction design also follows these phases, and it's underpinned by the philosophy of the user-centered design that is involving user throughout development. Traditionally, interaction designs begin by doing user research and then sketching their ideas. Uh, but who are the user to be researched and how can they be involved in the development? So these are the questions. So will they know what they want or need, or we just ask them? From where do interaction designer get their ideas, and how do they generate designs? So interaction design has specific activities focused on discovering requirements for the product, designing something to fulfill these requirements, and producing prototypes that are then evaluated. So in addition, interaction design focus attention on a user and their goals. So this approach has a four phases which are iterated. So first we have the discover. So designer in this phase, designer try to gather insights about the problem. Then define. So the designer develop a clear brief that frames the design's challenge. Then we have the develop, solution or concept are created or prototype, tested and iterated. And lastly, we have deliver. The resulting project is finalized, produced, and launched. Design is also about trade-offs, about balancing conflicting requirements. One common form of trade-offs is when developing a system to offer advice, for example, is deciding how much choice will be given to the user and how much direction the system should offer. Often, the division will depend on the purpose of the system. For example, whether it is for playing music tracks or for controlling traffic flows. So getting the balance right requirements experience, but it also requires the development and evaluation of alternative solution. Generating alternative is a key principle in the most discipline, and one that is also central to interaction design. Uh, Linus Pauling, twice a Nobel Prize winner, once said, "The best way to get a good idea is to get lots of idea." So generating lots of idea is not necessarily hard, but choosing which of them to pursue is more difficult. And Sapper suggests four main approaches to interaction design, each of which is based on distinct underlying philosophy. User-centered design, activity-centered design, system design, and the genius design. He acknowledged that the purest form of this is unlikely to be realized and takes extreme view of each in order to distinguish between them. In a user-centered design, the user knows best and it's the only guide to the designer. The designer role is to translate the user needs and goals into a design solution. Then the activity-centered design focus on the behavior surrounding a particular task. Users still plays a significant role, but it is their behavior rather than their goals and needs that are important. Then system design is structured, rigorous, and holistic design approach that focus on context and is particularly appropriate for complex problems. In the system design, it is the system, for example, people, computers, object devices, and so on, that are the center of attention, while the user role is the goal of the system. Okay, so different design problems lend themselves more easily to different approaches. And different designer will tend to gravitate toward using the approach that suits them best. Although an individual designer may prefer a particular approach, it is important that the approach for any one design problem is chosen with the design problem in mind. Okay, so importance of involving the user. Okay, so involving a user and others in the design process means that the design and potential solution will need to be communicated to the people other than the original designer. So this requires the design to be captured and expressed in a form that allows review, revision, and improvement. So the best way to ensure the development continues to take user activities into account is to involve real user throughout the development. So in this way, developers can gain a better understanding of user goals, leading to more appropriate and more usable product. However, two other aspects that have nothing to do with functionality are equally as important if the product is to be usable and use expectation, management, and ownership. So these are the two. Sabi nga kanina. So expectation management is the process of making sure that the user expectation of the new product are realistic. So the purpose of expectation management is to ensure that there are no surprises for user when the products arrive. So if user feel they have been cheated by promises that have not been fulfilled, then this will cause resistance and even rejection. Marketing of the new arrival must be careful not to misrepresent the product, although it may be particularly difficult to achieve with a large and complex system. It is better to exceed user expectation than to fall below them. This does not mean adding more feature, but that the product support the user goals more effectively than they expect. So involving user throughout involvement development helps with expectation management because they can see from an early stage that the products what the product's capabilities are. A second reason for user involvement is ownership. Okay, so users who are involved and feel that they are have contributed to a product developments are more likely to feel a sense of ownership toward it and support its use. So degree of user involvement. Okay, so different degree of user involvement may be implemented in order to manage expectation and to create a feeling of ownership. At one end of the spectrum, user may be a co-opted to design team so that they are major contributors. For anyone, for anyone user, this may be a full-time basis or a part-time basis, and it may be for the duration of the project or for the limited time only. Okay. Excuse me. There are advantages and disadvantages to each situation. So if a user is co-opted a full-time for the whole project, their input will be consistent and they will become very familiar with the product and is rational. However, if the project takes many years, they may lose touch with the rest of the user group, okay, making their input less valuable. So if a user is a co-opted part-time for the whole project, he or she will offer consistent input to the development while remaining in touch with other users. So depending on the situation, this will need a careful management as the user will be trying to learn new jargon and handle unfamiliar material as a member of the design team. Um, Yet concurrently trying to fulfill the demand of his or her original job. Okay, so this can be become very stressful for the individuals. If a number of user from each user group are co-opted to part-time for a limited period, input is not necessarily consistent across the whole project. But careful coordination between user can elevate this problem. In this case, one user may be a part of the design team for 6 months, then another takes over for the 6 months, and so on. So, at the other end of the spectrum, user may simply be kept informed through regular newsletter or any channels of communication. Okay, so provide they are able to influence the development process through a workshop or similar event, this can be an effective approach to expectation management and ownership. So in a situation with hundreds or even thousands of users, it would not be feasible to involve them as all members of the team, and so this might be the only viable option. Okay, so in this situation with hundreds or even thousand users, it would be not feasible to involve them as a member of the team. And so this might be the only viable option. So in this case, a compromise situation is probably the best. Okay, so representative from each user group may be co-opted onto the team on a full-time basis, while other users are involved through design workshop, evaluation, session, and other data gathering activities. The individual circumstances of the project affect what is realistic and appropriate. If your end user group are identifiable, you are developing a product for a particular company, then it's easier to involve them. If, however, you are developing a product for open market, it is unlikely that you will be able to co-op a user to your design team, and to alternative approaches are needed. So what is user-centered approach? Okay, so it means that the user, the real user, and their goals are not just technology, are the driving force behind product development. As a consequence, a well-designed system will make the most of human skills and judgment. It will be directly relevant to the activity in hand, and it will support rather than constrain the user. This is a less a technique and more of a philosophy. Okay, so in 1985, Gold and Lewis laid down the principle they believed would lead to be a useful, easy to use computer system. Okay, so early focus on user and task. Okay, so this is the first. So this means first understanding who the user will be by directly studying their cognitive behavior, anthropomorphic and attitudinal characteristic. So this requires observing user doing their normal tasks, studying the nature of those tasks, and involving user in the design process. Mm. Early focus on user tasks. So this principle can be expanded and clarified through the following five further principle. So again, first, user tasks and goals are driving force behind the development. While technology will inform design, option, and choices, it is not the driving force. Instead of saying, where can we deploy this technology and what technologies are available to provide a better support for user goal. Next, we have the user behavior and context of user are studied and the system is designed to support them. So this is not just about capturing user tasks and goals, but how people perform their tasks is also significant. Understanding behavior highlights priorities, preference, and implicit intention. Next, we have user characteristic capture and design for. So when things go wrong with technology, people often think it is their fault. People are prone to making errors and have certain limitations, both cognitive and physical. Product design to support people should take this limitation into account and try to prevent mistake from being made. So cognitive aspects such as attention, memory, and perception issue are introduced in our previous lesson, right? Okay, so next, user are consulted throughout development from earliest phases to the latest as discussed earlier. There are different levels of user involvement and there are different ways in which to consult user. And lastly, uh, all design decisions are taken within the context of the user, their activities and their environment. So this not necessarily mean that the user are actively involved in design decision, but that is one option. So we also have the empirical measurement. So early in the development, the reaction and performance of intended user to printed scenarios manual and so on are observed and measured later. Later on, user interact with simulation, prototypes and their performance and reaction are observed and recorded and analyzed. Um, where possible, specific usability and user experience goals should be identified, clearly documented, and agreed upon at the beginning of the project. They can help designing choose between alternative design and check on progress as the product is developed. Identifying specific goals upfront means that the product can be empirically evaluated at regular stage throughout the development. So after the empirical, so we also have the iterative design. So when problems are found in user testing, they are fixed and then more tests and observation are carried out to see the effects of the fixes. So this means the design and the development is iterative with a cycle of design, test, measure, redesign being repeated as often as necessary. So iteration allows designer to be refined based on the feedbacks. As user and designer engage with the domain and start to discuss the requirements, needs, hopes, and aspiration, Then deeper insight into what is needed, what will help, and what is feasible will emerge. So this lead to a need for iteration for the activities to inform each other and to be repeated. So no matter how good the designer are and however ever clear the user may think their vision is of the required artifact, ideas will need to be revised in light of the feedback. Okay, so likely several times. So this is particularly true when trying to innovate. So innovation rarely emerge a whole and ready to go. So it takes time, evolution, trial and error, and a great deal of patience. So iteration is inevitable because designer never get the solution right the first time. So, so these three principles are generally accepted as the basis for a user-centered approach. Then, so we have the four basic activities in the interaction design. We have the establishment requirements, designing alternatives, prototyping, and evaluating. Okay, so again, so the four basic for iteration design. Sabi nga natin, we have the first, establishing requirements or discovering requirements. Okay, so for the iterative product. So yung designing alternatives that meet those requirements, while the prototyping, the alternative design so that they can be communicated and assessed, and evaluating the product and the user experience offered throughout the process. Okay, establishing or discovering requirements. So this activity covers the left side of the double diamond of design. And it's focused on discovering something new about the world and defining what will be developed. In the case of interaction design, this includes understanding the target user and the support and the iterative product could usefully provide. So this understanding is gleaned through the data gathering and analysis which are discussed. Designing alternatives. So this is the core activity of designing and is part of the development phase of the double diamond. So proposing ideas for meeting the requirements for iteration design, this activity can be viewed as a two sub-activities sa the conceptual design and the concrete design. So yung conceptual design involves producing the conceptual model for the product, and the conceptual model describe an abstraction outlining the people can do with the product and what concepts are needed to understand how to interact with it. Concrete design consider the details of the products including colors, sounds, and images to use, menu design, and icon design. Alternatives are considered at every point. So conceptual design is we'll discuss in our future lesson. Okay. Then we have the prototyping. Okay, so prototyping is also part of the develop phase of the double diamond. Okay, interaction design involves designing the behavior of interactive product as well as their look and feel. So the most effective way for user to evaluate such design is to interact with them. And this can be achieved through prototyping. So this not necessarily mean that the piece of a software is required. There are different prototyping techniques. Okay, so not all of which require working piece of a software. For example, paper-based prototypes are quick and cheap to build and effective for identifying problems in the early stage of design. And through role-playing, user can get a real sense of what it will be like to interact with the product. Then last, we have the evaluating. So evaluating is also part of the development phase of the double diamond. It is the process of determining the usability and acceptability of the product or design measure in terms of variety of usability and user experience criteria. Evaluation does not replace activities concerned with quality assurance and testing to make sure that the final product is fit for its intended purpose, but is its complement and enhance them. So the activities to discover requirements, design alternatives, build prototypes, and evaluate them are fed back into the further design to identify alternatives requirements. Okay, so next. So a simple interaction design of a life cycle model. Okay, so understanding what activities are involved in interaction design is the first step to being able to do it. But it's also important to consider how the activities are related to one another so that the full development process can be seen. So the term life cycle model is used to represent the model that capture a set of activities and how they are related. Software engineering has spawned many life cycle models, including the waterfall, spiral, the RAD, or the rapid application development. Um, One life cycle model that has not widely used, but which was intended to capture the iterative nature of software development, was called the fountain life cycle model. Okay, so the field of HCI has also life cycle model. Okay, so it's been associated with several life cycle models such as the STAR, okay, any international standard model, yung ISO natin. Existing model has varying levels of sophistication and complexity. For project and involvement, only a few experienced developer, a simple process would probably be adequate. However, for a larger system involving tens or hundreds of developers with hundred or thousand of users, a simple process just is not enough to provide the management structure and discipline necessary to engineer a usable product. So something is needed that will provide more formally and more discipline. Okay, so note that this is not necessarily mean that innovation is lost or that creativity is default. Just that the structured process is used to provide a more stable framework for creativity. However, simple or complex it appears, any life cycle model is simplified version of reality. It is intended as an abstraction, as with any good abstraction. Only the amount of data required for the task at hand will be included. Any organization wishing to put a life cycle model into a practice will need add details specific to its particular circumstances and culture. Okay, so most projects start by establishing a requirement. The project may have arisen because of some evaluation that has been done, but the life cycle of the new or modified product can be thought as starting at this point. Uh, okay, so some practical issues. Okay, so our discussion so far highlights some of the issue about the practical application of user-centered design and the simple life cycle of interaction design introduced earlier. So these issues are listed here. So first question is, who are our first issues, who are the user? Who are the user needs? How to generate alternative design? How to choose among alternatives? And how to integrate interaction design activities with other life cycle model. Okay, so we all the emphasis on user and user involvement in the interaction design process. A fairly basic question to ask is, who are the user? So identifying the user may seem like a straightforward activity, but in fact, there are many interpretations of the term user, and involving the right user is crucial to successful user-centered design. So the most obvious definition of those people who interact directly with the product to achieve a task. So most people would agree with this definition. However, there are others who can also be thought as a user. For example, include their definition user, those who manage direct user, those who receive products from the system. Okay, those who test the system, those who make the purchasing decision, and those who use competitive product. Eson identified three categories of user. So we have the primary, secondary, and the tertiary. So primary user are those likely to be frequent hands-on user of the system. The secondary user are the occasional user or those who use the system through intermediary. And the tertiary user are those affected by the introduction of the system or who will influence its purchase. Okay, so the trouble in that there is a surprising wide collection of people who have a stake in the development of a successful product. So these people are called stakeholders. Okay, so stakeholders are people or organization who will be affected by the system and who have a direct or indirect influence on the system requirements. Hmm. Dix make an observation that is a very pertinent to the user-centered view of development. So it will frequently be the case that the formal client who order the system falls very low at the list of those affected. So be very wary of the changes, which take power, influence, or control from some stakeholder without the returning something tangible its place. So the group of stakeholder for a particular product will be the larger than the group of people normally thought of as a user. Although it will, of course, include user, using the definition above, the group of stakeholder includes the development team itself as well as its manager, the direct user and their managers, recipient of the product's output, people who may lose their jobs because of the introduction of the new product, and so on. So these are the stakeholder. So who are the stakeholder? Again, it can be as a supplier, the local shop owner, managers and the owners, the customer, okay, or the checkout operator. So these are the stakeholders. Okay, so what do we mean by needs? Okay, so if you had asked someone in the street in the late 1990s, okay, when he or she needed, I doubt that the answer would have included the interactive television or a ski jacket with integrated MP3 player or a robot pet. So if you presented the same person with these possibilities and asked whether he or she would buy them if they were available, then the answer may have been more positive. So when we talk about identifying needs, it is not simply a question of asking people, what do you need? And then supplying it because people don't necessarily know what is possible. Robertson refers to undreamed of needs, which are those that users are unaware they could have. Instead, we have to approach it by understanding the characteristic and capabilities of the user, what they are trying to achieve, how they achieve it currently, and whether they would achieve their goals more effectively and have a more enjoyable experience if they were supported differently. There are many dimensions along which user characteristic and capabilities may vary, and that will have an impact on the product design. A person's physical characteristic may also affect the design. Size of hands may affect the size and the positioning of input buttons, and more abilities may affect the suitability of certain input and output device. Height is relevant in designing physical kiosks. For example, strength in designing a child's toy. A toy should not require too much strength to operate, but may require strength greater than expected for the target age group to change batteries or perform other operations suitable only for an adult. Cultural diversity and experiences may affect the terminology and the intended user group is used to, or how nervous about technology as a user may be, or how facility is used. So if a product is a new invention, then it can be difficult to identify the user and representative task for them. Example, before in-car navigation system were first developed, there was no user to consult about requirements and there were no representative to task to identify. So those development the system had to imagine who might want to use it and what they might want to do with it. So it may be tempting for designers simply to design what they would like to use themselves, but their ideas would not necessarily coincide with those of the target user group because they have different experiences and expectations. It is imperative that representative user from the real target group be consulted. For example, NetClients developed a new product that would seamlessly integrate the services necessary for the user to achieve a specific task of the internet. Okay, they took a user-centered approach and employed a focus group studies and survey to understand their customer needs. But developer observed the focus group to learn more about their intended user group. Okay, so Isensi also comment that it is always tempting for developers to create product they would want to use or similar to what they have done before. Whether the product is a new invention or not, it is always useful to start by understanding similar behavior that is already established. Introducing something new into people's lives, especially a new everyday item, requires a culture change in the target user population, and it takes a long time to effect a culture change. Focusing on people's goals and usability and user experience goal is more promising approach to interaction design than focusing on people's need and expecting them to be able to tell us the requirements for a product. So how to generate alternatives? Okay, so a common human tendency is to stick with something that we know works. We recognize a better solution may exist out there or somewhere, but it is very easy to accept this one because we know it works. It is good enough. Settling for a solution that is good enough is not necessarily bad. But it may be undesirable because good alternatives may never be considered, and considering alternative solution is a crucial step in the process of design. But where do these alternative ideas come from? So one answer to this question is that they come from individual designers, flair, and creativity. Although it's certainly true that some people are able to produce wonderfully inspired design while others struggle to come up with any ideas at all. So very little in this world is completely new. For example, if you think of something commonly believed to be an invention such as steam engine, so this was fact inspired by the observation that the steam from a kettle boiling on the stove lifted the lid. Clearly, there was an amount of creativity engineering involved in making jump from a boiling kettle to a steam engine. But the kettle provided an inspiration to translate experience gained in one context into a set of principles that could be applied in another. So innovation usually arises through a cross-fertilization of ideas from different perspectives, individuals, and contexts. The evolution of existing products through the use and observation or straightforward copying of others' similar products. Cross-fertilization may be resolved by discussing ideas with other designers. Okay, while Buxton reports that different perspective excuse from different users generate original ideas about alternative design. As an example of evolution, consider the word processor. The capabilities of suite of Office software have gradually increased from the time they first appeared. Initially, a word processor was just an electronic version of a typewriter, but gradually other capabilities including the spell checker, thesaurus, style sheets, graphical capabilities, and so on were added. A more pragmatic answer, again, sa ating question, uh, is that alternatives come from seeking different perspective and looking at other design. The process of inspiration and creativity can be enhanced by prototyping designer own experience and studying other ideas and suggestions. Deliberately seeking out the source of inspiration is a valuable step in any design process. These sources may be very close to the intended new product, such as competitors' products, or they may be an earlier version of similar system or something completely different. Having said this, under some circumstances, the scope of the consider alternative design may be limited. Again, design is a process of balancing constraint and constantly trading off one set of requirements with another. And the constraint may be such that there are very few viable alternatives available. For example, if you are designing a software system to run under the Windows operating system, the elements of design will be prescribed because you must conform to Windows look and feel and to other constraints intended to make Windows program consistent for the user. So if you are producing an upgrade to existing system, then you may want to keep the familiar elements of it and retain basically and the same user experience. Okay, so the idea text box, a library database website. Okay, so the innovative product design company IDEO was mentioned in our previous lesson, right? Okay, so some of its creative flair is a collection of a weird and wonderful engineering uh, housed in a large flatbed filing cabinet called the tech box. So the tech box holds hundreds of gizmos and interesting materials divided into categories such as amazing materials, cool mechanism, interesting manufacturing processes, electronic technologies, and thermal and optical. So each item has been placed in the box because it represents a neat idea or a new process. So the staff of IDEO take a long selection of items from the tech box to brainstorming meeting. So the item may be chosen because they provide a useful visual props or possible solution to a particular issue or simply to provide some light relief. Each item is clearly labeled with the name and category, but further information can be found by accessing the TechBox online catalog. So each item has its own page detailing what item it is, why it is interesting, where it came from, and who used it. Or knows more about it. So items in the box include an example of metal coated wood and material with and without holes, the stretch bend and change the shape of colors of different temperature. Okay, so each of IDEO offices has tech box, and each text box has its own curator who is responsible for maintaining and cataloging the items and for the promoting its use within the office. So anyone can submit a new item for consideration. As item become commonplace, they are removed from the text box to make way for the next generation of fascinating curious. So this is the tech box. Okay, so how to choose among alternatives? Okay, so choosing among alternative is mostly about making design decision. So with the device, use keyboard entry or a touchscreen. Will the product provide an automatic memory function or not? So this decision will be informed by the information gathered about the user and their tasks and by the technical feasibility of ideas. Broadly speaking, though, the decision fall into two categories. Okay, those that are about externally visible and measurable features, and those that are characteristic internal to the system that cannot be observed or measured without dissecting it. For example, in a photocopier, externally visible and measurable factors include the physical size of the machine, the speed and quality of copying, the different size of paper it can use, and so on. So underlying each of these factors are other considerations that cannot be observed or studied without dissecting the machine. For example, the choice of materials used in photocopier may depend on its friction rating and how much it's performed under certain conditions. In interaction design, the user experience is the driving force behind the design, and so externally visible and measurable behavior is the main focus. Detailed internal workings are still important to the extent that they are affect the external behavior or features. One answer to the previous question is that choosing between alternative design is informed by letting user and stakeholder interact with them and by discussing their experiences, preferences, and suggestion for improvement. To do this, the design must be informed that can be reasonably evaluated by user, not in a technical jargon or notation that seems impenetrable to them. Documentation is one of the traditional way to communicate a design. For example, a diagram showing the product's components or description of how it works. But a static description cannot easily capture and the dynamics of behavior. And for the interactive product, this need to be communicated to the user can see what it will be like to operate it. Testing prototype to choose among alternatives. Prototyping is often used to overcome potential client misunderstanding and to test the technicality, feasibility of suggested design, and it is in its production. So it involves producing a limited version of the product with the purpose of answering specific question about the design feasibility or appropriateness. Prototype give a better impression of the user experience than simple description. So different kinds of prototyping are suitable for different stage of development and for eliciting different kinds of feedback. So when the deployable version of the product is available, another way to choose between alternative is to deploy two different variation and collect data from actual use that is then used to inform the choice. So this is called the A and B testing, and it's often used to alternative website design. Another basis on how to choose between alternative is quality, but that requires a clear understanding of what quality means, and people's view of qualities vary. So everyone has a notion of the level of quality that is expected, wanted, or needed from a product. Whether this expressed formally, informally, or not at all, it exists and it forms the choice between alternatives. For example, one smartphone design might make it easy to access a popular music channel, but restrict sound settings, while other requires more complicated key sequence to access them channel but has a range of sophisticated sound settings. So one's user view of quality may lean towards ease of use, while the other may lean towards sophisticated sound settings. Most projects involve range different stakeholder groups, and it's common for each of them to define quality differently and to have different acceptable limits for it. For example, although all stakeholders may agree on a goals for a video game such as characters will be appealing or graphics will be realistic, the meaning of this statement can be varied between different groups. Dispute will arise if Later in the development, uh, transpired that realistic to stakeholder group of a teenage player is different from a realistic to a group of parent stakeholder or to the developer. Capturing these different views clearly clarifies expectation, provide a benchmark against which products and prototypes can be compared and form a basis on which to choose among alternatives. So how to integrate interaction design other models? So many other disciplines contribute to interaction design, and some of these disciplines have life cycle of their own. Prominent among them are those associated with software development, and integrating interaction design activities within the software development has been discussed for many years. Okay, so the latest attempt to integrate the practice-focused agile software development. So agile method began to engage in the late 1990s. So the most well-known, these are extreme programming and the dynamic system development method, DSDM, although establishment before the current agile movement, also belongs to the agile family as it adheres to agile manifesto. So these methods differs, but they all stress the importance of iteration, early and repeated user feedback, and being able to handle emerged requirements and striking a good balance between flexibility and structure. There are also all emphasize collaboration, face-to-face communication, streamlined process to avoid unnecessary activities, and the importance of practice over process that is getting work done. So the opening statement of the manifesto for agile software development, okay, so ganito yung pagkakalagay. So we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individual and interaction over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Okay, so this manifesto is underpinned by the series of principles which range from communication with the business to excellence of coding and maximizing the amount of work done. The agile approach to development is particularly interesting from the point of view of interaction design because it incorporates tight iteration and feedbacks and collaboration with the customer. For example, in Scrum, each sprint is between 1 and 4 weeks, with the product of value being delivered at each end of each sprint. Also, Extreme One programming stipulates the customer should be on site with the developer in practice. The customer role is usually taken by a team rather than by a person. And integration is far from straightforward. So many companies have integrated agile method with the interaction design practice to produce a better use experience and business value, but it's not necessarily easy. Okay, so meron natin. Okay, so in this lesson, so we look at the user-centered design and the process of iteration design. That is what is user-centered design, what activities are required in order to design of interactive product and how these are activities related. So a simple interaction design lifecycle model consisting of 4 activities was introduced and issues surrounding the involvement and identification of user, generating alternative design, evaluating design, and integrating user-centered concern with other lifecycle were discussed. Okay, so again, so different design disciplines follow different approach, but they have common um, they have a common characteristics are capture and double diamond design. Okay, so it's important to have a good understanding of the problem space before trying to build anything. The interaction design process consists of 4 basic activities. Again, you discover requirements, design alternatives that meet requirements, prototype design, so that they can be communicated and accessed and evaluated then. Again, user-centered design, rests in a three principle: early focus on user and task empirical, measurement, and iterative design. So these principles are also key for interaction design. And involving user in the design process assists with expectation management of feeling of ownership, but how and when to involve user requirements careful planning. So there are many ways to understand who user are and what their goals in using product, including rapid iteration of working prototypes. And looking at others' design and involving others people in design provide useful inspiration and encourage designer to consider alternative design solution, which is key to effective design. Um, Another thing is usability criteria, technical feasibility, and user feedback on prototypes can all be used to choose among alternatives. And prototyping is useful technique for facilitating user feedback on design at all stages. And interaction design activities are becoming better integrated with the life cycle models from other disciplines such as software engineering. Okay, so that's it for today, and thank you.